Welcome, everyone. This is Jim Norris from Backstage Insider. We're very fortunate today to have with us Danny Marks, well-known Canadian guitarist and broadcaster, and other things that we'll discuss. How are you doing today, sir?
Very well, Jim. Great to connect with you again after all these years, and
Yeah,
congratulations on staying alive and well and moving with the times. Man, you're up to date.
that's great.
Yeah.
So, first off, I just want to go back to the beginning, back to your family days, I guess. I'm just curious if your family was musical or had any interest in music that got you interested in playing the guitar.
My dad could play any instrument that he laid his hands on.
Wow.
So he was a virtuoso harmonica player. He played the fiddle, he played the violin. He was wonderful on the piano. We had a big old piano in the basement, and he'd never walk by it on his way to one room or the other without stroking a little bit of Embrace Me, My Sweet Embraceable You, or something like that. He had incredible renditions, and being as how our name was Marks, he also did kind of a very cool version of Chico Marx, was it? The Marx brother that played the piano, and he did an incredible version of Chopsticks. He told me when he was a kid, his mom would tell him, Ben, no more of that boogie woogie. You get just like Long John Baldry. You get back to your lessons. But Dad loved Cab Calloway and the Cotton Club. So I would hear him playing sort of, like rollicking rhythm on the piano. And on his harmonica, he could channel Paul Adler with the chromatic, with the button. And then
Right.
he'd get into the Grand Ole Opry. And I knew that Dad loved, he was a little bit country, he was a little bit rock and roll. He was born in 1915. So he had this incredible musical side to him that was most admirable. And Mother was an actress in every way, dramatic. So I think in a way I come by it naturally, but neither of them pursued it in their living.
Yeah, that's great. So you started playing guitar at 11, from what I've read. And
Yeah,
just out of curiosity, what kind of guitar was your very first one?
so cousin Nancy had a Stella, so I liked it. It had steel strings, and then Mom and Dad took me to Dave Snyder Music on Yonge Street, which is still there. I think it's block north of where they used to be. They got me a Harmony Classical, Stella Harmony Classical master model. Was $40 with painted on border, around it, and send me up for lessons with the man who taught Toronto guitar, Tony Braden, a
Oh, wow.
wonderful, a wonderful man. And Jim, if you look and see how many people got lessons from Tony Braden,
Yeah.
he was so patient. I was like, hey, you know what? I don't want more lessons. I don't want more school. I want to rock out, secret agent man. And they were like, you're going to learn the right way, son. And I stayed with Tony as long as I could. And then I left. But that was my first guitar, that Harmony. Uh, I guess it was Stella by Harmony, or maybe it was Harmony by Stella, but it was the two names. $40 was the price.
But that's not a bad guitar to start with, really. I mean, you get some guitars that you couldn't play no matter who you are. Some of the ones that people start on and they wonder why they're having troubles, but the guitar is so bad that nobody could play it.
I think guitar is like that in a way, especially well back then. A lot of them, yeah, you're right. They had that huge high action, and the necks were
Yeah.
warped. And because my Harmony Stella was a classical, it was easier and softer on the hands. But guitar poses you a challenge. You want to play it, you got to suffer. And yeah, like I got blisters on me fingers. That sort of thing happened. And then, your hands get calluses, and away you go. But you got to pass that hurdle at first.
That's great. Well, you started with a great teacher. That really helps, doesn't it?
He was wonderful. And Jim, if I have time to say this, that after I left Tony Braden and I went on to Edward Bear and I was a big blues guy and everything, I never learned the right way, so called, to do stuff. I did it how I wanted to. I didn't sit there with the record and the needle and playing and listening and copying and note for note. I listened and I played things in the wrong key and I used the wrong. I just found my own way, which got my own style. But in 1971 or so, I went back to Tony Braden and said, please, Tony, show me how to do things right. I promise this time I'll read the music from the page. And he said, Danny, I've got to tell you something that people knew I was your teacher and they came to me for lessons so I could teach them how to play like you. But I couldn't. My playing wasn't, in Tony's mind, I guess it wasn't that great. But he took a little bit of credit for being my teacher, even though I didn't really learn everything right. But I did learn the second time I went back to him how to play the arpeggios, how to play the chords. His thing was to teach you all the notes up and down the board in the key of C, so you knew the modes. And when I made the album Guitar Theology in 1997, I dedicated it to Tony Braden. I was on CBC Radio. We called him. He was in Vancouver. And the first time we called him, he said, "Oh, Danny, yes, I remember you." He said, "I like your record. It's what we used to call nice music." Because I think I was channeling Al Kayola. And there's a name that nobody talks about today. But that's the kind of guitar playing I love. It's not really jazz, it's not really blues or rock, it's just, individuals. So that's my story with Tony. He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Excellent. So, what was the journey from, I guess, studying with him and then to Edward Bear? Like, what happened through your high school years?
Well, high school was at North Toronto Collegiate, and I could still sing in the school song. And then they liked me so much in grade 10, they asked me back a second time. And then and after going to summer school, and then my parents moved, and I had to go to another school, Forest Hill Collegiate. And I realized that, boy, you could cross the tracks, and it was still the same kind of stuff you had to deal with, and the bullies at school and everything. Well, Jim, once the Beatles came out, because we loved Elvis, I loved Dwayne Eddy, I loved Segovia, Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Kingston Trio, the Venture, the Shadows, Hank B. Marvin. What a sound. So we loved all that. And then the Yardbirds came out and all this. So we were following everything. And when Yorkville came along, everybody started going down. And we lived close enough. We lived by the Beltline, Chaplain Crescent. So I could walk to Yorkville and see the hippie bands and see Luke and the Apostles and the almighty Poppers. They were like, if Toronto had a Beatles, it could have been the Poppers. The
Yeah,
Poppers were much like the Beatles. They were so unique. They had Skip Prokoff with that incredible drumming. Denny Gerard, like Jacob Bloody Pastorius on the bass. And Chuck Beal, who was one of the greatest psychedelic guitarists you could ever hear. And either Bill Marion or Adam Mitchell, wonderful singers who totally got that John Lennon kind of stance and approach, but in our own Canadian way. We were so inspired by Yorkville. I joined a group called the Whiskey Sours, and we used to practice at the Chamonix. Our leader was Peter O'Brien, who went on to be a producer for Disney movies. He did My American Cousin. Peter was a wonderful man and a mentor. And after the Whiskey Sours broke, I answered an ad that said blues guitarist wanted. And I went to a basement in the corner of Prince Arthur at Bedford, and I met Larry Eboy, Paul Weldon, Craig Hemming, and the incredible drummer Dave Brown, who went on to be the drummer of, I believe it's Doctor Music. The guy
right.
could, he had tremendous facility, and Dave was the first to leave. I told the other guys when I got there, I had my little Les Paul guitar, first one that I ever had. I said, you can send these other auditioners home. I'm the one who's going to get this gig. And at the end of the day, they admitted, you're right. And Edward Bear was a five-piece group. We jokingly called it the Edward Bear Review as a parody. And when we got booked at the Club 888, I think they threw eggs or tomatoes or something at us. We went back a few months later, and it was the Rock Pile, and we opened for Paul Butterfield. And that was just about the most amazing day of my young life as a young 17-year-old blues guitarist.
Excellent. So, with the Yumi in Mexico, when that one came out, and it was um, really successful. I've talked to a lot of musicians over the years. Remember the Guess Who when these eyes came out, and it was kind of a shock to them that they were, playing these little gigs, and then all of a sudden the demand for them went crazy, and the money obviously improved, and the traveling, And did you find that as well, that you were in this band and all of a sudden you had this hit record, and there was demand for Edward Bear from everywhere?
It really was quite a beautiful shock. The thing I think for Edward Bear was that we were all, three fellows. Paul Weldon, who was our keyboard player, organist, and he ended up playing the piano bass like the Doors had, because we once we realized we couldn't keep a drummer, Larry Evoy went back and played drums, which was already his first instrument. And Paul
Right.
Weldon said, "I'll play the piano bass with my left hand." We were a trio. Larry and I were best friends, and also he was a little older than me, and he was like a hip older brother. Like my brother, my real brother, was so bloody cool before the Beatles. He knew the Beatles were going to be big, but he couldn't make that jump. He was stuck in the R&B mode. But man, he was into the blues before anybody else. But Larry Evoy was like a younger brother, like Peter O'Brien was to me too. I should say an older brother. So Larry and I became very close, and Paul was like the glue because Larry had an incredible, as we know, pop sensibility. He wrote Last Song and Masquerade and Fly Across the Sea after I left. But in the early years, yeah, Jim, as you say, suddenly we were opening for Led Zeppelin twice. The Paul Butterfield opening was incredible. Badfinger was exciting as hell. It was at Ongano's in New York. Opening for Humble Pie at the Whiskey a Go Go in Los Angeles was tremendous. And one of the great thrills of my young life was to meet and open for Jim McGuinn and the Birds, Calgary Stampede. I waited until Jim went into the men's room. I went in, pretended to have to pee, or maybe I did. And I said to him, "Man, when we were kids, we used to get high listening to your music. The Birds were wonderful." And so it really was a very heady journey. And you know, Jim, looking back, I'm sure it was too much too soon for my young mind, and I think for Larry as well. I think Paul was more grounded. He took it all in stride. He never quit his day job completely. He went on to be a designer for art. He stayed as an architect. Larry and I got into music full force. But then, as things developed and our fans started saying to me, "Hey, you guys are a heavy band. Why are you doing this pop single? You used to be in Mexico. It was a beautiful recording. Terry Brown did a wonderful job. Doug Riley orchestrated it. And Paul White was our mentor. He was the man who knew the Beatles would be big before anybody else. And he picked Edward Bear along with Richie York, and we were so fortunate to have a team. And I kind of just threw it all away, but that was after a few years. But the first blush of success, Jim, it was amazing.
That's great. So then, after you left Edward Bear, which I think was 1972, you played with quite a list of different artists. Um, and obviously, you must have learned a lot from working with them, and it must have been quite a pleasure when I look at the list of who they were.
Sometimes I'll forget. Like recently, one of our people at Jazz FM 91, Jeff Chalmers, the afternoon guy, decided to play David Bendit music on a vinyl as a special feature. And I
Right.
thought back to, oh man, like I remember playing up in North York and David Bendit was in the front row, kind of like, oh, I think I could be a guitarist too. And yeah, the guys in Rush, they were like, who is this Edward Bear? Because we were kind of heavy in the early days. And the guys in Triumph, Gil Moore, he adored Larry Evoy, but they used to watch what we did. So yeah, after Edward Bear, one of the first things I did was a group called Jericho, which was meant to follow in the footsteps of the band. They were
Yeah.
managed by Albert Grossman. The original Jericho had my guitar hero as a kid, Freddie Keeler, Benny Gerard, and Gord Fleming, the genius, a genius of keyboard, who is not hardly remembered today. Somebody's got to go back and look at the Shays and say, David Clayton Thomas and the Shays were the greatest blues rock band Toronto ever had. So original, so fiery. So I joined Jericho, but I quickly realized all these guys I played with, Jericho and the other bands I played in, whether it was Cliff Carroll and the Hitchhikers, or Langford, the disco band. I was in a disco band one day and a country band the next. The only way I knew was one band had satin shirts, the other one had satin pants. I mean, I was just trying to play whatever I could play, and I loved all the music, and I still do. But I realized that a lot of these fellows who had never had their brush with fame were never at the top. They didn't carry themselves in that way like somebody would. Like when I met Robert Plant, he was, you know, you could say arrogant. He's much more humble now. He's a nice man now, and he seems to really be grateful to still be around. But back then, come on, he was swaggering. Well, we all swaggered. So I realized that these poor guys who were in the bar bands, they were just working, knocking it out. Whether it was Jericho with dear Rick Burkett or Scott Cushme, Professor Piano, Frank the Police, any of those chaps, great musicians. Bob Yeomans from Jackson Hawk was in the band. They were wonderful musicians, but they never had a taste of fame. Once you've had that, you're different. It changes you. And I always feel I carried that with me. And, people say, well, should you be wearing socks and sandals on stage? And yeah, I wore socks and sandals, but shorts and, like, no, you got to carry yourself like you're worth watching. If you're going to get on a stage, you got to perform, max show. And a lot of these guys were just clocking it in, for the few bucks. But it was a great education. You remember Bill Amesbury, who became Barbara,
Sure.
was a wonderful, generous band leader that took us all on a cross-country trip, first class by train, from Toronto to BC. He was wonderful. Malcolm Tomlinson, who was supposed to be Bryan Adams, signed to A&M Records before Bryan Adams. They knew he was a gifted talent, like Rod Stewart, a great Englishman who came to Toronto. He loved Malcolm. He just didn't really want to be in the spotlight. He was reticent. So he went back. I want to be like Levon behind the drums, singing and playing, having a beer with the lads, talking about soccer. He didn't want to be in the spotlight. And I craved it. Ken Tobias was the most gentle, wonderful, loving soul. He drank his tea with honey and lemon. And I think I have a bit of a sore throat today, fellas. Go easy on me. And Athan Katsos, who was the bassist, may he rest in peace, both of them. They were wonderful people to play with. Rick James, on the other hand, he was mean and vindictive, and he took his songs from everywhere. He ripped off stuff from everywhere, but he made it his own. He was like a black Mick Jagger, incredibly talented, but very mean. He left a hell of a legacy.
Wow.
People, they think of him as superfood. What he did to my old amplifier after I walked out on him. Fortunately, I had insurance and they covered the cost of it. But he was one hell of a guy. So I think I learned a lot. And then I realized I don't want to be a hired gun. I don't have the temperament to be a session musician, which I thought would be great. I wanted to learn guitar, not the show-off guitar that everybody played, those kinds of guitar heroics. I wanted to learn that kind of stuff that you have to listen for, that stuff that sits in the background, the rhythm guitar that grooves along with the hi-hat. That was my ambition, and to be like that. But then I realized I wasn't somebody who could stand backstage as a singer. I needed to be in the front because I like being funny. And, I love entertaining people. Entertainment is wonderful, and singing, well, that keeps you young.
That's great. So, um, your one of your other careers being a broadcaster, a radio host, um, 20 some odd years now. How did that come about? How did you end up with your show on Jazz FM?
Well, to go back to the earliest years when I was at Oriole Park Public School, my teachers wanted to flunk me in grade two, Miss Burnett. She was mean. And she said, Danny needs to be failed. He's failing. My mother, Sylvia Marks, she said, oh, he's failing. My son? Let's see. So she took me to Miss Armitage. Miss Armitage tested my IQ, as they used to call it. And when mother came back with the papers, which I still have, she threw them on the desk at school and said, it's not my son who is failing. It's your system. You don't recognize this boy. And they had to send me to like special classes, a along with a couple of other kids from our school, Kathy Chichi and others, who were like, didn't quite fit in. And mother also sent me to drama lessons. And my drama teacher, the head of the drama, New Play Society, was a woman by the name of Dora Maver Moore. They have a thing called the Dora Awards. Well, that
Yes.
old biddy was my drama teacher. She lived in a house that was built in the 1800s, came from a historic family, and she taught us drama because mom recognized. So they didn't flunk me. They weren't able to flunk me in grade two. And I kept going at school, and I decided I really liked art. For a while, I wanted to be a dancer, but I realized, you had to wear tights. And uh,
I have
that
trouble.
would be a great way to meet girls. So, but I like dancing. I still do. And anyway, I stayed with drama. I always liked drama. When I was in grade 7 or 8, I got to be part of a CBC radio play. And I think I want to say Michelle Finney, who was Razzle Dazzle, was also in this play. She was a child actress. And we were doing Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates. I had a minor part. I might have been one of the skates. I don't know, Jim, but it was a minor part. But the thing I recognized was they had a piece of cellophane and they crinkle it up by the microphone. Ooh, we've got a good fire going in the fireplace. And they had a little wooden door in a frame. Ooh, someone's here. They had coconut shells. Clip, clop, clip, clop. Oh, I hear the horses coming down the street. It was magic. And we stood around this old ribbon mic, and they had their arms around each other's shoulders and read from the script. And I thought, radio. And Dad loved radio, and my brother loved radio. And I loved Cousin Brucey on WABC. So flash forward to 1987, I get a call. This is David Malahoff from CBC. We'd like you to come on and guest with Arthur Black on the Basic Black Show. You know that bit you do where you do Stump the Band with TV themes? I think Arthur would like that. You got it. So I go in and I'm singing to Arthur Black, you know who was stronger than the average bear. You know who was always in the Ranger pair. And I look down at Arthur Black's bald head and he goes, hey, that's the Yogi Bear theme song. And we had a big laugh. And after that, I got employed by CBC. They gave me my own show, Under the Covers, and another one called Duet. And eventually we were teamed up with the blissfully wonderful Canadian great Sheila Rogers and the late wonderful beloved Arthur Black. And we had a show called The Hum Line. And it ran for a long time. And one day, the boss of CBC Radio, Anton Leo, kissed me on the cheek. And after that, I realized I was out of a job. But Chuck Camry at Jazz FM 91. He had recently reinvented CJRT, the internet. And Chuck said, come on in. I want to talk to you about blues and making a blues radio show. He said, I want a blues program that's not for the society. He didn't use that term, but said, in other words, it's not run by the little government that runs the blues in Toronto, but that's independent. He said, what kind of a blues program would you do? I said, well, your motto is hear the color of jazz. Mine would be all the colors of the blues. Said everything. I said, I want everything. Louis Armstrong, Dwayne Eddy, B.B. King. He said, stop right there. Dwayne Eddy. He said, what label was he on? I said, Jamie. At first, produced by Lee Hazelwood, and then he went on to be on RCA. Chuck said, you got the job. And he gave me the job. And that was almost 25 years ago. And dear Chuck Camry, may he rest in peace. Imagine all of the stuff that Jazz FM has been through. And I think in many ways we're a better station than ever. There are some people there that are doing great work. And I am really thrilled to still be on. And you never stop learning. Just like your job, Jim. You have evolved. You have realized paper is in the wastebasket in a lot of ways these days. But still, a good book is still treasured. But you've taken it to this level. And radio is still theater of the mind. Nobody owns that phrase. And so I'm still there. And it's always new and exciting.
So if a up and coming blues musician, for instance, wants to get on your show, how would they go about doing that? What's the process if there is one?
If somebody wants to get airplay, I would say that think it's a good idea to hire a publicist. If you've gone to all the trouble of writing a song, recording it, arranging it, producing it, take the last step and get a publicist so that that publicist can then send your records out, virtual records or whatever they are, out to everybody. But if you're an individual and you don't want to hire a publicist, well, I think that's like not having a producer. Sure, you can produce yourself, you can publicize yourself. For that matter, you can play your own drums if you want. But they would, if it's, let's just say it's an individual, you send me your press release or your information. Here's my new song. Here's an MP3 of it or a WAV file. And here's my picture. And here's a little bit about me. And then I listen. And the thing about it is that when you're a musician and you're also programming radio, you have to just listen like a listener would. You don't listen and think, oh, wonder what chords he's playing or how she is fingering this arpeggiated thing or something. You have to just turn all that off. So I would compare it to this. Imagine you're an actor and you watch a movie and all you see is people acting and scene decorating and stuff. You never get into the plot. You don't feel it like a person would feel it just not knowing. So I have to switch all that off. And Jim, I tell you, I can listen to a piece of music and pretty well within the first few seconds know whether it's something I would like to play and program on the radio. And on the other hand, once it's something I think that passes that initial stage, I don't play it only once. I'll take a song, like for instance, we got something by Binky Griptite. What's My Number? And Binky is a musician from, I want to say he's Amy Winehouse's band and the Daft Kings. And his What's My Number is a great blues. And I heard it right away. I went, oh, man, this is new and it's old. And it's got a plot. What's my number? It's like you're at the butcher store and you pick a number with the person you love. You don't want to be number 4. You got to be number 1.
Right.
So I thought, I've got to play it a few times because then people will get to know it. You don't always like something the first time. So as much as I got that gatekeeper that goes, nah, this isn't good. For instance, if the drums are too loud, or if the first thing I hear is the drummer going racket or racket or racket up building a house, I go, this isn't going to be good because the drummer is counting in the song and they're trying to get their licks in. But you want to hear a team. You want to hear a whole thing. You don't want to hear bits and pieces. And I don't like those guitars with too many pedals and effects on them that aren't natural sounding. It's very hard to get a good electric guitar sound. And people want to be everything in your face. And if everything's big, then it's too much. Some things need to be small so that other things can be big.
Right. That's great. So recently, you've just released rather a new single, and tell us about those two songs. I've read a little bit about it, but just where they came from based on your life's experience.
I know what you're getting at. So last May, I was asleep in my bed. I had the music playing, because I like to have the music going a little bit at night sometimes. Music I've recorded is very soothing. And over the top of that music, in my sleep, I heard a screaming, shrieking fire alarm in my third floor. And the short story is my neighbor's house caught fire and our house started to go up in flames.
Yikes.
So I'm out of the house. So I'm out of the house, and all I can think of is now I've got to get back into the house. I'm taking it, I think, very well because it's a learning experience. I'm in my 75th year as a human being, and this is no time to be, going from, rooming house to rooming house living. But I got to get the insurance. We got to rebuild. None of the guitars were damaged. None of my beautiful artwork was damaged, but my house was severely burned. So one of the songs is One Way Ticket Home, and it's kind of got that Rickenbacker sound in it because my last few releases have been Man on the Radio, which is autobiographical, and it's got the Gibson SG. What a bold sound that is, playing the lead, and a 1960 Fender Stratocaster through the old 63 Vibra Verb with the rhythm guitar and a light tremolo sound. and it was recorded remotely. Everybody sent their part in, and it was all assembled, and it was beautifully the way it came together. But it was, hey, you're talking about yourself. Well, I'm writing from personal experience. So other radio were like, well, we can't play this because it's like he's promoting himself. But you got to sing about what you know. So then I put a song out called I'm Ready and used the electric guitar, which is a great 70s soul sound. So now I've got One Way Ticket Home using the Rickenbacker 12 string, and it's about how you home is where the heart is. And the flip side is the blues, because I want to give blues radio the chance to say, he's finally given us the blues, we can play it. Sure, he's got his own radio program. Sure, he's a radio guy. But because, sometimes when you're a radio person, and I don't know if it happened to Kim Mitchell, but it might have, as soon as you got your own show, suddenly other stations are like, well, we can't play him on our station because he's on Q107. So I'm giving them a blues. And Jim, it's what they all brag about with blues. It's live off the floor. There's only one overdub, and that's the saxophone by brilliant Jim Hardy. Jonathan Goldsmith, a gift to music if ever there was one in Canada, who flies under the radar. Robert Pilch plays rhythm guitar, who's one of the greatest jazz musicians in the country from a great jazz family, the Pilch family, one of my dearest friends, and Jonathan as well. Another dear friend, Alec Fraser on bass, and the drummer is Chuck Keeping from Big Wreck, ex of Big Wreck. And these guys played it live off the floor, and it's Please Mr. Conductor, and I wrote the song on the GO train because I had to go sing with Maury Yates in Hamilton, and I had a problem with my foot. The doctor gave me a shot of steroids, and I jumped on the train. I thought, I don't know how to buy a ticket. These machines, Union Station is crazy. I got to get to Hamilton. And I knew I didn't have a ticket. And I thought, man, this is a song. Somewhere just west of Mimico, I started writing the words, Please, Mr. Conductor, won't you let me ride your train? I got on with no ticket, and I won't do that again. The doctor fixed me. And then I got people. I got to be there. It was a Johnny Cash tribute night. And so I wrote the song, and it's completely, because it's a blues, it's just, it's nothing kind of really original in a way. I mean, it's like a Lonnie Johnson or a Sam Cooke or Otis Rush song, B.B. King. But he played it live off the floor, and I got 3 guitar solos in there, way too much reverb on the guitar, but I think it's got a good feel, and I'm hoping blues radio will embrace it. Yeah, Mom?
So
Yeah.
if somebody wants to buy the new tracks, what's the best? What platform are you on? Where can they find it?
This is where you're going to kind of leave me a little bit in the dust because, Jim, I am not technically too terribly adept. I believe we're on maybe it's iTunes or TuneCore, maybe something like that. There may be some Spotify. To me, I realize I accept that there's not really any money in this. Maybe there's glory. I mean, this is glorious. Here I am, Canadian musician. This is great. This is a historic. I'm a little hysteric, but it's a historic magazine, and now it's a virtual magazine. And you are one of the Canadian greats. So here I am. So, I'm sure if you want to buy it, you can search for it online. It's on YouTube. You can listen for free. I want people to go to YouTube. If they can, if they don't even buy it, doesn't matter. Go on, click it, give it a like, give it a comment. And that's what'll boost me in the algorithms or whatever it is. And, I'm doing it for the glory more than for the money. But I do have the idea to make an album, and eventually the songs I've written and recorded will be an album. And I will make a limited number of CDs. Jim, I remember only like a few years ago, maybe a decade or so, we used to go and play these street gigs, and our CD person would be shelling them out at $20 a pop, and our pockets would be bulging, and people couldn't sell physical products. Now it's, I don't know what it is. The best thing for me would be if somebody decided to take one of my beautiful songs and put it in a movie or in a TV.
Right.
That's what I think.
And if somebody wants to see you playing live, where would they find you over the next few months?
Well, I'm pretty much strictly in Toronto. I've played a lot of bars over the years, but mostly now I'm limiting it down to two venues. I'm open to other suggestions, but I play at a place called Smoke Show the first Sunday of the month, every month. And Smoke Show, believe it or not, is the old Chicken Deli. We were there in the 80s. It was an amazing place, but it's better now than then. It's cleaner. The sound is great. Stage, the dance floor. Some of the folks are on in years, but honestly, when you see them dancing, they're reliving their past love and glory. Last time we were there was just before Remembrance Day. One of our regular guys was in the Canadian Battalion. He has to walk with a walker, but he leaves it. He gets on the dance floor. His grandsons were in the audience, and when we created and dedicated a song to him, his grandsons were thrilled. How did we know our grandfather was such a celebrity? The band made up a song about him. And one time, Jim, we were there, and Bob Nevin, who you may remember was a great Toronto Maple Leaf, his wife, his widow was in the audience. Bobby Vaughn, another great Toronto Maple Leaf, his son was in the audience. They didn't know they were both there. I introduced them in the middle of the dance floor. I thought they were going to have a face-off. It was wonderful. The Smoke Show is a big, beautiful venue, first Sunday of the month. We also play at one of Toronto's smallest venues, Castro's in the Beach, and more music fans, pound for pound, than any place I've ever played. The Castro's audience loves music. The place lifts off when the band kicks in. It's small, the audience is pretty well in your lap, and it's beautiful, and somebody's phoning me, and so I'm just going to turn it off. Yeah, so that's where we are. And there's nothing like the thrill of playing live. I wish I had more. I wish I had better gigs. I wish somebody, I'm wishing this out loud so somebody can hear. I wish somebody would come along and say, Danny, you should be playing bigger. You should be playing better venues. I knock on doors, but I'm not about to sort of, beg for things either. And I'm not as good at booking and things and accounting. I have other jobs. I love writing. I love playing the guitar. I love being on the radio. I would like to say, if somebody wants to help me manage me or help me as an agent to find gigs, Jim, one time Jack the Kaiser and Paul James and Danny Marks were a trio. And I think if somebody was there that could actually make that happen properly, it would be like the Highwaymen of Canada. And a lot of people have suggested they do it, and they're not up for the job. One or two who actually could, man. I'd love to see them. There's 11 o'clock. I think we are we something
Yeah,
ding.
well, this has been great talking to you. We'll wrap it up now. So I certainly suggest anybody in Toronto to get out and see Danny and check out the new songs and have a look at the history. There was, I've known you over the years, but there was quite a few things in there that I didn't know about. So it's been great, and I'll let you know when this goes live.
Thank you, Jim. You know,
Thank
you're a great interviewer, and you tell a good story yourself. So I really appreciate you letting me just go on as well, man.
No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.